Good afternoon, ערב טוב לכולם. אני גרתי בישראל 7 שנים, ותמיד טוב לעזור. It's really a pleasure for me to be back here at the Herzliya conference, which is a key gathering to discuss the future of Israel and the region. Thank you very much for the invitation to address you tonight and talk about EU-Israel relations. The European Union-Israel relationship is built, first of all, on shared values. And the first one are the democratic values. And of course, we have also strategic interests. Israel is one of the closest partners of the EU on the southern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. The relationship is strong in many different areas, such as, for example, research and innovation, environment, tourism, education, and of course, business. The EU is by far Israel's most important trading partner. We also work together on fighting anti-Semitism. After the 7th of October, Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel, and then the war in Gaza, we have seen an unprecedented wave of anti-Semitism in Europe and in other parts of the world as well. And so we have to act immediately and decisively together. On the EU side, we are implementing our EU strategy on combating anti-Semitism and fostering Jewish life. It was launched in 2021. It's a comprehensive strategy with 100 initiatives, 3/4 of which have already been put in motion, aiming to ensure that Jews in Europe can live their lives freely, safely, and in line with their religious and cultural traditions. And we rely on the member states to protect the Jewish communities in the EU and to fight anti-Semitism. On December 6, 2023, we adopted a communication, No Place for Hate, Europe United Against Hatred, to counter growing polarization in European societies, to reinforce the security of the Jewish communities, to develop an EU network of trusted flaggers and fact-checkers, to address online anti-Semitism, and to fight hate online. Anti-Semitism is a threat not only to the Jews, but to our democracies and the rule of law in our countries. And it goes against EU values. We have witnessed with the recent protests in Europe and the glorification of terrorism, how anti-Semitism is also a threat to our security. Let me turn now to the tragic events surrounding October 7. We all felt shocked beyond words by the sheer brutality of the terrorists, the horrible acts of sexual violence, the unacceptable kidnapping, including of children, all people, European citizens, and of course we condemn Hamas in the strongest possible terms. EU leaders repeatedly and strongly emphasized Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law and humanitarian law. Our head of state and government will again meet at the end of this week, and they will again repeat this position all together at 27. The day after the attack, the Israeli flag lit up the European Commission building in Brussels in solidarity with the people of Israel. On 11 October, the presidents of the Parliament, the Council, the Commission gathered together in front of the European Parliament with members of parliaments and citizens to observe a minute of silence for the victims of Hamas, followed by the playing of the Hatikva. The same week, on 13 October, both the European Parliament President Roberta Metsola and European Commission Ursula von der Leyen came to Israel to express EU solidarity. They went to Kfar Aza and Reim and met with families of the hostages. And President von der Leyen said, "This is the most heinous assault against Jews since the Holocaust. We thought this could never happen again, yet it did. In the face of this unspeakable tragedy, there is only one possible response. Europe stands with Israel." In November, the EU High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, visited Kibbutz Be'eri and also met families of the hostages. The EU provided logistical support to the transport of medicines to hostages in Gaza in November from Europe to the Rafah border. Unfortunately, it appears that the hostages didn't get the medicines. We have called and continue to call for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. Their safety and well-being is a grave concern to all of us. Hamas is a terrorist organization designated as such by the EU since 2001. Over the last months, we have enacted several rounds of additional sanctions against Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad under the EU terror list, but also a dedicated sanction regime and our EU global human rights sanctions regime over widespread sexual and gender-based violence. We agree with Israel that Hamas has to be defeated, but Hamas is not all the Palestinian people, and the Palestinian people are in their majority all other victims of Hamas. And as you know, the EU is deeply concerned about the catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza and its dramatic effects on civilians, particularly children. We cannot remain indifferent in the face of the tremendous suffering of the Palestinian population of Gaza. And as I said, we know Hamas' responsibility in this. The protection of civilians has been our utmost priority over the last 9 months, and since October 7, we have committed over 290 million euros for humanitarian assistance. Like many of Israel's friends, including the US, the European Union is very concerned about the absence of a ceasefire and the continuation of the war, the fact that the hostages are still in Gaza, and the human suffering everywhere. So that is why we fully support the comprehensive roadmap presented by President Biden, which will lead to an enduring ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages, and a surge of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. The European Union believes that Israeli, but also Palestinians, need to live in safety, dignity, and peace. That's why we stand ready to work with you, the Palestinian Authority, regional, international partners, to contribute to the day after in Gaza, and ultimately to a political solution, a political horizon, and a peace process. We believe this is the way to end the conflict once for all, because ultimately October 7 showed us that walls, technology, soldiers are not enough to make Israel safe. More is needed. I know that the notion of a two-state solution is not very popular in Israel right now, but the idea to partition this sacred piece of land and establish two states for two peoples is not a European invention, nor it is meant to deny the Jewish people ancient ties to the Holy Land. It is simply the only solution that makes sense. And the great leaders of the Jewish people have realized this many decades ago. For example, in the morning of Tuesday, July 8, 1947, Chaim Weizmann, then the chairman of the Jewish Agency and soon to become the first president of the State of Israel, addressed the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine. He said, and I quote, "I think I am speaking the mind of a great many Jews after a great deal of hardship, after a great deal of testing, after a great deal of evaluating the possibility of what we can do for a form of partition that would satisfy the just demands of both the Jews and the Arabs. Much has changed since, but Weizmann's words were true then and are still true now. Yes, it may seem that peace is today more elusive than ever, but European history teaches us that even the bitterest enemies can reconcile. World War II is the lowest point in the history of Europe, but shortly after we hit rock bottom, we managed to unite and achieve peace and prosperity for our people. The same is possible in the Middle East as well. The European Union stands ready to work with Israel Arab partners to achieve this goal, as difficult as it may seem now, because we believe in peace. The Middle East is changing. There is a need for a regional alliance that unites those who share the same goal of promoting security, peace and stability. That is why we condemn in the strongest terms the Iranian drone and missile attacks against Israel on the 13th of April. The EU has now imposed a series of sanctions against Iran in response to its human rights abuses, nuclear proliferation activities, military support for Russia, for Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, and we have expanded our sanctions regime in order to include also its military support to Middle Eastern proxies. We are also taking concrete action together with our partners to avoid an expansion of a regional conflict, notably in Lebanon and in the Red Sea. We launched a maritime military operation called Aspides to safeguard freedom of navigation and the security of commercial vessels in the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the broader region. And of course, we call everyone to refrain from escalatory actions. I was a young French diplomat serving in Tel Aviv in November night in 1995, when Yitzhak Rabin spoke about his readiness to take risks for peace. Minutes before he was assassinated, I was there on Kikar Maichele Israel when he said that the path of peace is fraught with difficulties and pain. For Israel, he said, there is no path that is without pain, but the path of peace is preferable to the path of war. We owe it to all people of this region to never stop striving for peace. אנחנו מאמינים בשלום, זה אפשרי. תודה רבה.